Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Behind the Lines, which is episode 4 of season 6 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll, or this particular user poll, is the Deep Space Nine episode Behind the Lines. So Behind the Lines takes place during the Dominion takeover of the station story arc that covers the story of Kira and Odo trying to use the resistance cell to foil the Dominion, and when they learn of a plot of that Damar has to take down the minefield, Kira comes up with a plan to sabotage them. Unfortunately, at the same time, Odo receives a visit from the female changeling, and he gets distracted by the link. So, in the sabotage plan, Odo fails to play his part, and Rom is caught before he can commit the sabotage, and he is arrested as the saboteur. And we also get a side plot of Cisco being promoted to an office job to plan out a strategic attack, and him dealing with not being able to execute it as Dax takes over command of the Defiant. So, this episode, I'm just going to lay this out up front, not be coy about this. This is one of my favorite Deep Space Nine episodes. I love this episode. In fact, if you've seen the top 50 video I did for Deep Space Nine, this was in my top 10. In fact, I think even the top 10 video I did for Deep Space Nine several years ago, I'm pretty sure this is also in my top 10. I do consider this one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine. Now, anyone who knows my feeling on the Dominion takeover story arc, the 7-episode arc, sometimes it's called a 6-episode arc because it's the first 6 episodes of season 6, but it actually started in the finale of season 5, so you have to include that. So it's a 7-episode arc. But anyway, anyone knows my opinion on that. Is one of my favorite aspects of the entire Star Trek franchise. It was unique for the time for a show to do a serialized arc like this in the 90s. It wasn't very commonplace. I mean, I had some people point out, well, Babylon 5 did it first. Well, sure, and there's some other odd examples out there of shows doing serialized arc, but it wasn't commonplace. And Deep Space Nine certainly was, I believe, a trailblazer for doing this. And I remember being particularly blown away that they decided to do it. And I think it was extremely successful. There was only one dud, sons and daughters, in this entire arc. And for the most part, I think this is some of the best television that the Star Trek franchise ever produced. And I always point to this episode as sort of the highlight of it. Now, if you watch my top 10, top 50 videos, I actually place Sacrifice of Angels higher, but only slightly. Like, this is my number 7, Sacrifice of Angels was like my number 4. So it's only like 3 spots higher. So really, I pretty much, I think these episodes are on par. I suppose I put Sacrifice of Angels slightly higher because of the spectacle involved. It was really impressive. But I think this episode often gets underlooked. I think it's a somewhat underrated episode in the arc, because for me it was always highlighted what was so great about this arc. It seems to me a lot of people point more at like Call to Arms or Rocks and Shawls, where I think I would actually say this one, or even Favor the Bold. And I think this is a bigger standout to me, because it's more dialogue based and less action orientated. But I think that's what Deep Space Nine does best. And I don't think you always, as much as I do love Sacrifice of Angels, you don't always need spectacle to have great television. And because some of my favorite Deep Space Nine episodes, my 2 favorite, Duet and In the Pale Moonlight, is all dialogue based and basically no action. To me, and I talked about this before, that's a bit more impressive. Now, this episode in particular, like as I was rewatching it, it's like there's so many scenes in this episode. I was like, wow, that was well written, that was well acted. It really draws out the story. Now, this episode in particular, I think it personifies why this Dominion takeover of the station works, because it goes in a bold new direction you wouldn't think the show capable, because you think of it as a spinoff of Next Generation, and Next Generation and the original series, as much as I love those shows, it was basically an episodic formula where the ship is going on the adventure and it goes to a different planet or a different spatial anomaly thingy every week, and it's sort of, even though I would argue Next Generation slips in a lot of continuous character arcs, which was very against the episodic formula, it's still kind of episodic in nature. And you just got basically, no, I wouldn't say the same thing, but a similar concept week to week. And this is why this was so bold for a Star Trek franchise to go in a direction where, yeah, I mean, you get episodes of Next Generation where aliens take over the ship, but they're always gone. But, they always conquered by the end of the episode. It was really bold to have, like, a long arc, and not just, like, the 7 episodes, but in universe. It's, like, over 3 months. It's, like, 4 or 5 months of our main characters that we love, Odo, Kira, Quark, Rom, Jake, living under an occupation by the bad guys, basically, by an authoritarian military force. And of course, one that's allied with the Cardassians, the biggest villain that the Bayshore has ever had. Their oppressors, the basically space Nazis, who are back, and they're somewhat diluted form because the Dominion wants to keep them in check, but still Dominion aren't the good guys either. And I think this, so it's a very bold choice to do, but I think this episode illustrates them taking the most advantage out of that premise, because first of all, it begins, the opening scene we get in this episode is absolutely amazing. I love this scene. It shows, because Kira has formed, a resistance cell. And at first, I gotta tell you, I think Roxanne Scholes was the first episode she formed it, and I think the first time we actually see it in action as sons and daughters. And I gotta tell you, I did not take this seriously at first, because when she said a resistance cell, I was thinking of, the flashbacks we get to herself in the Bajoran Resistance, where it was a bunch of badasses with guns hiding in the forest, going around killing Cardassians and blowing shit up. But what we get here is a potluck dinner with Jake, Cisco, and Lita and Rom sitting around having a potluck dinner in their quarters. I'm that's... So I gotta be honest, I didn't really take that resistance cell seriously. I saw more of as a protest group, or behind the doors, let's get and have a potluck dinner and just complain. But here, this episode, I think, earns it. This was the first episode that actually earned it as a resistance group, because the very opening scene, you see, I love everything about the scene. You see Kira and Rom stand on the second floor of Quark's bar, looking down at this conflict that's arising between Damar and some Jem'Hadar, conflict that they instigated by purposely leaving an inflammatory report that Damar wrote about how they should just kill off the Jem'Hadar before the Catcher Cell White runs out, and the Rom stole it and left it right where the Jem'Hadar could find it. And of course, the Jem'Hadar were none too pleased about that report, and Damar accuses them of stealing it because he didn't know that Rom stole it. And I love the way the scene is narrated, basically between Kira and Rom, as they explain it as it happens, and you hear the distant voices of Jem'Hadar and Damar talking, but you don't really hear the dialogue. You mainly hear Kira and Rom narrating, because they know what's going on. And I love that. Just the way it played out was so good. And then, it got much worse than they even expected, because it wasn't just a bar fight. They were, the Cardassians were like shooting people and stabbing the Jem'Hadar, and the Jem'Hadar were just like snapping Cardassian necks and like breaking their backs across their. It was like super. I absolutely love Kira and Rom's reaction to this, because Rom just stands there gate with his mouth open like with this big holy shit look on his face. But Kira's reaction is even better, because she just like slowly starts to back away as this happens, because you can tell that this is way more than she's expecting. She was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna slowly back away and hide in this corner. Like, that was absolutely amazing. And then you get the follow up to Odo like confronting Kira and being like, oh well, you know, do you have anything to say for yourself? And she's like, yeah, it worked even better than I thought. And he's like, I knew it was you. And she's like, of course you did. We talked about this in the last Resistance meeting. And it was like, yo, but I said it was a bad idea. And it's like, well, then you left as if there was nothing left to stay. But Jake and Rom and I stayed behind, and we decided it was a good idea. Yeah, I wish that they would have included some Bajoran red shirts or yellow shirts, or just background characters in this Resistance cell to give it a bit more validity, because having a Resistance group just consisting of Rom, Jake, and Kira doesn't really take me seriously. But that being said, I still absolutely I love that Odo's attitude is very, because Odo. And I love how this is explored. He hates the Dominion. He wants them off the station. But his changeling nature, and the nature he's always been described on, as someone who supports order. He supports law and order. He's very much for keeping things orderly. And the nature of Resistance is that is to create chaos, basically, because they don't have the strength and numbers to confront their enemy directly, so they have to use shadow tactics and create chaos in an atmosphere of fear. And so I love the conflict, the inner conflict in Odo, how he's reconciling those two things, and how he'd be resistant to the Resistance. Sorry, he'd be resistant to Kira using tactics like that, but Kira's absolutely right that that's the only kind of tactics they can use. And it's a very smart strategic move, really, if you think about it, because that is the Dominion occupation's weakest point, is the uneasy alliance between the Dominion and the Cardassians. So it was like actually extremely smart to exploit that. And I love, again, like every scene in this, not every scene, but most of the scenes in this episode, I just think, God damn it, they're so well written. Because I love how when Odo is in the, his security office with Kira, and they're talking this over, like the female changeling just barges in. Like, here, because, and it makes sense that she wouldn't necessarily, she's a changeling. She doesn't have to announce her arrival. But I love how it wasn't like, oh, we have news of female changelings visiting Deep Space Nine. We didn't get a scene with like Dukat and Ops being like, oh, the female changeling ship's going to dock. Tell her I'm going to meet blah blah. Like, the episode did nothing to preamble that. No, like, preamble, oh, the female changeling's coming aboard, or waiting, being like, oh, I can't wait for the changeling to get here. It's just all of a sudden a conversation between Kira and Odo, boom, walks in the room. That was awesome. As I said, it makes sense for her character, because changelings are changelings. They can take the form of anything. They're very, very stealthy, very sneaky. It makes sense that she wouldn't announce her presence, and that she wouldn't preamble, and Odo wouldn't know beforehand until she's standing right there next. And I love it's like interrupts a conversation between her and Kira, and it's basically like, okay, Kira, why don't you just fuck off, so I can actually talk with Odo. And I don't know why this episode's so underrated, to be honest. I don't know if people maybe just they think it's good, they don't gravitate it towards it that much, or maybe they have some issues with Odo's turn. If it's the latter, I gotta strongly disagree with that. Well, I strongly disagree with any reason, because I think this episode's amazing. But I particularly disagree with any Although, to be fair, I never saw any specific thoughts like this expressed online. I mean, a lot, and I guess I should get into the side plot a little bit, because I think a lot of the complaints I have heard about this episode have to do with the side plot with Cisco and Dax. And I'm not actually going to talk about that very much, and to be honest, because I think it's pretty obvious the strength of the episode is the storyline that takes place on the station. And to be fair, and this is probably another universal truth, the strength of the entire story arc, the Dominion Takeover story arc, is the storyline on DS9. I remember there was a novelization of this story arc, and it was written by, I can't remember her name, Diane Carey or something. It's an author I do not like. And she ruined that novelization. Was awful because it focused more on the Starfleet side of thing, and it kind of neglected it. Kind of tried to squeeze and downplay the Dominion takeover. And she just hates female characters. She always accentuates all the male characters and makes them all swashbuckling and stereotypes, which I really can't stand her style of writing. But anyway, yeah, so that was really weird, because I think it's obvious to anyone that the Deep Space Nine storyline is definitely the strength of this entire story arc. So I don't really have an issue with an episode that maybe focuses more on that, and that the Starfleet thing is just an aside, because the Starfleet is not the strength, and I think it was wise of them. Now, as for this storyline with Cisco getting an office job being bad, I don't think it's bad. It's obviously not the greatest thing ever. It's obviously not what makes this episode great, but I don't think it hurts the episode. I don't think it's a bad storyline. It's not like every time they go back to it, I'm like, ugh, this bullshit with Cisco and Dax. I thought it was competently done. Like, it was fine. It was a good, like, if it was his own episode and fleshed out, I'd probably give it like a 6 or a 7. It was decent. Like, it didn't totally suck. I mean, you might say, well, it's not the greatest thing ever, therefore this episode obviously shouldn't be your top 10 and considered the greatest thing ever. No, because it was a side plot. And it was a decent side plot. I think it was... First of all, I've always had a weak spot for Jadzia Dax. For some reason, I gravitate towards the underused characters. In Next Generation, it was Geordi LaForge, and it was Jadzia Dax and Deep Space Nine. It was probably Harry Kim and Voyager. It's characters that I think are not inherently flawed. They're not inherently bad characters, but they're just characters that the writers tend to neglect and not do much with more, which I think they should. So whenever they do, I always appreciate it a lot more. And with that, so I love seeing Jadzia get command. I've heard other people complain and be like, "Oh, this makes no sense to give a lieutenant science officer." I'm like, would you rather they just bring in some random like character we never heard of? No, fuck that. I don't care what logical sense it makes. It works. It works for the story, and I do think this is a pretty effective story about it. First of all, it shows them with having the ritual of taking, the empty plasma thing that shows them that like they present it as a gift and do like a ritual, like this is it, people. This is and Cisco. We see Cisco doing it at the start of the episode, and then Jadzia mirrors it at the end. Although I think Avery Brooks did a much better job at selling this than Terry Farrell. Sorry to say, but it was still because this is it, people. Like the way she said it, I was like, all right, I don't quite buy it, but still, I love that. It shows how they're coping with the war and how they boost morale and the type of things they do. And I love how I actually do like the storyline that Cisco had to. He was so good at his job, he failed upwards, where he got promoted, where he was no longer doing what he loved to do, but he was so good at it, and it was pretty cool that Admiral Ross saw that in him too. It was like, you're great at strategy. You should actually be being more involved in the strategic side of this war. You're all great as a field commander, nothing wrong with you, but you're even better as a strategic mind. And I love it seeing him having to adjust to that, and him having to send Dax into fight and just sit there and wait for him, and how it's not something he was used to, and how he was up all night. Like, those are good character beats. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with this side plot. It may not be the best thing ever, but I don't think it hinders this episode the way that, say, for example, the Alexander storyline in Sons and Daughters actively hindered that episode because it was so terrible. Where here, was the All storyline was actually pretty good, and the D Space Nine stuff again was actually pretty good. But here, it's the D Space Nine storyline is definitely the strength of this whole arc. But I would argue that this episode focuses more on the D Space. That the writers are aware of this, and that's why the storyline with Cisco is more played up as a side plot. And as a side plot, I actually think it really works. I think it really works because I don't think it would have been smart to completely not show Cisco and everything, but I think the writers recognized that the strength in this story arc was the storyline that took place in Deep Space Nine. So we still, drop in on Cisco and Dax and all them and see what they're up to, but that's not the thrust of the episode, and it sort of shows just what they're up to. Now, getting back to the Deep Space Nine stuff, I love the interaction between Kira and Damar, and I think this episode is probably would have really hit its stride. How they have this really antagonistic relationship, and they sort of they jab at each other, but not in the same way that, like, say, Quark and Odo do, but a lot more antagonistic undertones to it, which I think really works. So, like, for example, when Damar, after the fight, Damar gets punished, so he gets demoted to working in the security office, and Kira's like, oh, you better be careful, Damar, next thing you'll be doing sanitation duty. Like, that kind of, and the way Damar, like, Kira's, like, trying to execute her plan, but she goes to the office to find out that he's not there, and Damar's there, and so she tries to leave because she's in a hurry, but Damar, like, I want to talk about the recent reports, and he, like, physically blocks her way, and be like, no, we're going to talk about this now, and she has to, like, push him aside. Like, that was, I just love their interaction, and it gets, I already covered Favor the Bold, but it gets even better in that, where in Sacrifice of Angels, where Damar's, like, it builds beautifully, but I do have to mention, like, with all these great dramatic scenes, dramatic storylines that we get in this episode, it also has some humor, and some very effective humor, and I gotta talk about it. It's in fact one of the best comedic scenes of the entire show, and this very intense, very dire, very dark episode about the Dominion taking over the station, and Odo betraying Kara to the point where he just the whole Federation is at risk because of his betrayal. And you get the scene where Quark finds out that Damar has found a way to take down the minefield was amazing. First of all, like, you have Quark and Damar in a bar, and I think maybe Damar, like, at first it should have been, like, very obvious that Quark's just trying to get Damar drunk, just so he can find out what he is. And I think Damar even knows this, because at first he's kind of like, I love how Quark, like, offers him a free drink, and he's like, that's very kind of you, like, and he makes a point to drink it first and then be like, but I can't talk about it. And, like, because he knew that Quark was trying to get him to talk about it, and that's why he was giving him a free drink. And I love how he drank it first so that Quark wouldn't have to take it away and be like, but I can't talk about it. And Quark's just like, we'll have another. And to make it more conventional, of course, Quark had to drink with him. And so the funny scene, and this scene is so great because it's dire and funny at the same time. And maybe some people are off-put by this, but I think this is amazing. I think this is one of the best uses of Quark and of humor in the entire show, because you have Quark show up to the Resistance potluck, and he's drunk off his, and I don't think we rarely see main characters drunk, and I don't think we've ever seen Quark drunk before. And it's something whenever it happens, I think it's really funny. Done so well. I like it. It's like, I was just having Kanar with Damar. Hey, that rhymes! Like, the way he's reacting. It was just such a perfect way to, because he's telling them basically that they're all fucked. That the Dominion is going to, Jem'Hadar ship's going to come pouring through the wormhole and wipe out the Federation. They're all doomed. And he's just like drunk off his ass while he's saying it. And I love how he's like, oh, it has something to do with the Deflector. And they're like, the Deflector? What does that mean? Rom's like, oh, they're talking about me. And I was like, oh, no, not Deflector. That's not right. I think it's Deflector. That's it, Deflector. And then you get the funny reaction, and Kira's like, what do you think, Rom? She's like, well, I'm glad it's not me. He's like, no, about the Deflector, Ray. Like, it's perfect comedy, but it doesn't interfere with the direness of what they're getting across still comes off extremely strongly. Like, the comedy does not at all interfere with that. It just makes it even stronger, in my opinion. It's like the perfect blend. So this is another, like, huge strength of this episode. And you also get like really small moments, like really nice touches, such as when Rom goes to Kira because they're gonna enact the sabotage, and he like brings flowers and he's like, oh, I just bring them as a distraction in case anyone asks him delivering flowers. And like, okay. So then like a group of Cardassians walk by and then Kira is like, oh, what are these flowers? And then Rom's like he doesn't know. Like normally he would have the other people play along, but Rom is just like, he's not stupid, that's established, but he's socially inept, I would say that, and not good at thinking of his feet, so he's just like, and so Kira has to sort of play for him. It's like, oh, these are from your brother. Okay, well, Tom, I don't like him. I'm gonna take them right back. And Rom's still like, and she's like, you know what, I'll tell him myself. And then pushes, and that was so true to both their characters. It was like great improvising on Kira's behalf. Of course, Kira is used to doing stuff like that. She's used to subterfuge. She's used to, because she was in the Bajoran Resistance, and we see from episodes like Necessary Evil and flashback episodes how she did have to do undercover work. She did have to put on a persona. So this is natural to her, where Rom, not very good at this sort of thing. I mean, he may be an engineering genius, but he's not very witty or smart on his feet or whatever. And just also the way Rom says, here's your flowers! Like, it's very artificial. It's like someone who's like a kid who's playing make-believe, who's being extremely obvious that they're just pretending. So it's so great that Kira just sort of takes completely over and sells it. And I buy that she sells in that the Cardassians don't think anything of it, because even though Rom was being completely horrible at it, she was just so good and was so used to it. So it's really nice touches like this to make this episode amazing. But let me talk about this whole Ordo betraying them, because I do wonder if this is the reason some people are off put by the episode or maybe don't like it as much. That's where I gotta like really put my foot down and strongly disagree, because especially watching this again, I think Odo's betrayal works so fucking well. This is what makes the episode so amazing. I think it's earned so well, because as I was just talking about earlier, like this kind of resistance thing is not really Odo's thing. It goes against the nature of his character, which is to want to strive for order, to want to prevent chaos, not cause it. But at the same time, he's conflicted because he doesn't like the Dominion and wants the Federation to survive. Now, the thing with the female changeling coming on board, and I think this is the scenes we get with Odo and the female changeling is so good because it's a progression. Because at first Odo he's acting kind of, I should start calling Odo the angsty teen, because I reviewed episodes with like Maura Pole, the scientist who raised him basically, and how he's basically a dick to Maura Pole because he didn't like the way he poked and prodded him. So especially the episode The Begotten in season 5, Odo comes off very strongly as like an angsty teen. Fuck you, Dad! And this time in this episode he's like being an angsty teen to the female changeling. So this time it's like, fuck you, Mom! start calling Odo the angsty teen, but that's how it starts, and that makes sense. It's like because she's waging a war against. I love how he says you're waging a war against my home, and her response is like it's like a laugh. It's just like a dismissal. It's like this isn't your home. What are you crazy? I love those perspectives, and you knew that Odo was. And I think this is why this storyline works so well, because it's a perfect follow-up to the Dias cast, where Garrick was torturing Odo, and Odo was like, what is the one secret that nobody knows? So he told Garrick the one thing that nobody knows is that he actually wants to return home. He wants to return to his people and be part of the Great Link. That's something very alluring to him, and that makes sense because that's what he always wanted. But then he learned there were a bunch of evil dictators trying to take over the galaxy. Then he was in just killing people responsible for all these atrocities. He couldn't support that, and especially couldn't support them going to war with what he thought of his adopted home, what he thought of his friends. Now, I don't really like when they try to imply that Odo, the only reason Odo is staying behind and supporting Starfleet is because of Kira. I think it's okay to imply it's the main reason. But I get a bit uncomfortable when they try to imply that if she wasn't there, Odo would just be like, okay, fuck you all, you're gonna die. I don't think that's the case, but I do think that she was the biggest allure. And I do love, to be clear, I do like in this episode how the female changeling does address that directly and be like, look, she keeps rejecting you. Just face it, dude. She's not that into you, and so you might as well just come back and be with your family. We'll support you. And but I love that's not the what turns Odo. I love what turns Odo is simply going into the link and learning about his people. And I love the scenes where she's explaining what it's like to be in the link, and he's so fascinated. He's like, you see his reaction. You can see how badly he wants to be with his people, and how fascinated he is to learn with his origins. And at first Kira asked him not to link because she was actually very correctly saw that was an easy way for the changeling to manipulate him. But eventually, he was so drawn, he was so fascinated to find his origin, even though at first you see that inner conflict with Odo, which I really love, that you see that he really loved Kira and was not more than just love. I would say this has a lot more to do with romantic love. It has to do with loyalty to her, and as I said, loyalty to everyone he knows, like his friend, his home, what he thinks of as his home, regardless of the female changeling balking. I think she doesn't understand Odo when she says, this isn't your home. And I think at first he does realize that she's wrong. He does realize this really is his home, and it goes beyond Kira. But I think the allure of his origins and being around people like him and behaving because he's going around taking a humanoid form, which isn't his true form all the time. He's interacting with humanoids who aren't the same. Their nature is different. He's always talking about you humanoids. Even though he does consider it his home, he does consider it to belong there, something always felt out of place. And they talked about this a lot in earlier episodes, so I think this is the perfect progression, where he has a loyalty to his home, to his friends, and the people he loves, but he still always had that element of feeling out of place. And so the female changeling arrives and offers him that what he never had before, to belong, that sense of belonging, that sense of feeling home, of feeling being with people that they love. Now I'm gonna draw a very kind of out there ridiculous analogy to my personal life. Why I think I can personally relate to this is living in New Zealand for 15 years, I very much thought of that as my home. I still do. There's friends and family over there. Well, not family, but people I know, friends, and who I think of as family, who are really close. And so I still think of them as my sort of adopted family. But my real family is here back in the U.S. In the U.S., like, I don't have a funny accent like I did in New Zealand. My accent was considered a bit odd. Every time I spoke, people could instantly recognize that I was not from there. And the culture is slightly different. Even though I lived there for so long, I got used to the culture. I got used to the lingo, dialect, and the way of going. And I still consider that to be a home to me and someplace I want to go back. But being back in America, being with my parents who raised me, it feels like I'm actually something I'm more used to. And so that's what I think with that's why I can really strongly relate to the story with Odo, even though I think there is huge differences, of course, because my parents aren't genocidal dictators trying to take over the world. And so that makes it a huge difference, but I still totally buy. But then again, my parents aren't changelings, and there's not a great link. So the difference between like Odo and humanoids and his actual people is not is much bigger than the difference between New Zealanders and Americans, which are actually very similar. So, it's a much broader, different situation. But on that base level, I can kind of relate to that. But I think that. But I love, so that's why I totally buy it, and that's why I think this storyline is so good that eventually Odo gets so drawn up with his wanting to return home, his sense of belonging, and then doing the link, which again I'm very resistant to the analogies of linking and sex. Because and it seems like in the show itself sometimes they play it like that. It's like when we see Odo and the female changeling linking together, some people say, "Oh, they're getting it on," but I don't think that is a very good analogy. I don't think that is a one-to-one analogy. Sure, there may be some similarities, but I think if you think of it as just sex, then I think you're looking at it wrong. And this is what I always say: if the changelings linking together is sex, then the Great Link is one giant orgy, which it isn't. I think if you're looking at the Great Link as a giant orgy, then you are totally missing the point. It's not what it is. It's more of their base level, the way of existing, and then like joining together. It's not for sexual gratification. It's more of a natural link where they sort of share their being. So it's something completely alien to a human understanding, and that makes sense because this is a show about aliens. So it makes sense that and I love when Star Trek does do stuff that's not just here's a human with bumps on his forehead, but something that would make sense that you would find in a completely alien culture. And again, that alienness of Odo does set him apart from most humanoids who are basically just humans with bumps in their heads, where his entire nature is different. And so so when Odo and the changeling link together, and Kira's trying to contact him because he's not where he needs to be, and he's going to not just get Ram arrested, but basically, and as Kira says, he just handed the Alpha Quadrant to the Dominion. And that, oh God, that's so powerful. Like, his neglect, but I totally bought that he was so caught up and this link and the joining. Again, it's not having sex, it's like an experience, it's an existence. It's like a state of being that he longed to experience but never really had, and to finally get that and really feel home, to feel oneness, to feel like he's existing in the state he always deserved to be. I do buy that he would totally neglect everything else, and that would override his sense of loyalty. And so when God damn, again, that scene where Kira confronts Odo after Ram is arrested is so fucking amazing. It's just everything about it so well acted, so well written, like so many scenes. It's just I look at in this episode, I just look at it as masterpieces. Like I love how Kira, when she goes to ring the doorbell to Odo's quarters, she just slams on it like that. It's just the body just is so amazing, and she runs in and she's like, Odo, what the fuck? And he's just like, oh, whatever, yeah, I don't care. I'm sitting here smoking a joint. Whatever, your stupid war, it doesn't really matter. He's like, what do you mean doesn't really matter? You just you lost the war. Like, trillions upon trillions of people, the entire Federation are all gonna die because of you. And he's like, nah, whatever. It doesn't really have anything to do with me. I'm not really involved in this. And again, I totally buy that change. I think that was really well earned. And this is where I have to give the writers a shit ton, a huge, gigantic pile of credit. Because particularly writers like Ronald D. Moore, and I think I would blame Ira Stephen Bear and some of the other Deep Space Nine regular writers for this, is that they often will have a tendency to retcon characters and have them behave or have things revealed about them that is not in keeping with their character, and not really care that it doesn't fit with what's been established. Like, I complain a lot about this with Bashir being revealed he's genetically enhanced. I just think they got lazy and didn't know what to do with Bashir and wanted to make him more cool and sci-fi, so they just threw in that storyline, which actually doesn't. It completely changed his character, and I think for the worse. I think it would be better if they would have just explored him. And I talked about they do this a lot, and I hear about a lot of times where Ronald D. Moore pushes for this to be done in cases where it shouldn't have been done. And thankfully, he was overruled. But if you see his show, he was co-showrunner for Battlestar Galactica. There's also very guilty in the last season. A lot of people accused of completely retconning and changing characters. So that's why I had to give Ronald D. Moore and the showrunners here, and the writers, a shit ton, a big gigantic pile of credit, because this does not come off as a retcon. This completely fits in Odo's character. It completely flows. It builds off of everything he's been established. It makes so much sense for his character, and it really works. And again, this is the kind of storytelling that Star Trek has never done before. Star Trek would never have a main character completely betray the crew, because the crew's always seen this as bond, as family. I mean, imagine if Worf was just like, suddenly it's like, nah, fuck you, Captain Picard, I'm not going to do this thing. And because of the result, like, the entire the Federation was going to fall. And because Worf was too busy hanging out with the Klingons, it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, alright, that doesn't make sense story wise, but assume that it would. They still would never do it. The Next Generation, Original Station, I would argue even Voyager. Although, because Voyager dabbled in this with Janeway and Chakotay being at odds with it, but they didn't really get it right, except for Scorpion, but it's a totally different thing. And that was more of just a disagreement between Captain and First Officer. You wouldn't get one of the characters completely betraying everyone they know and love, their family, their crew, and basically dooming the entire fucking Federation and Alpha Quadrant to death, basically, to being conquered and destroyed, and dooming trillions of people to death just because they got enticed by their own people. But again, the way it was done is completely believable, completely works, and it's so risky. It's something that Star Trek would never do, and I love it. They pull it off, and they pull it off well. And this is why Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek show. Because of episodes like this, because of episodes like In the Pale Moonlight, where they really take the risks, they really push the envelope, and they do things that Star Trek would never normally do, it's such great storytelling. Now, you can go back and watch the reviews I did for Favor of the Bold and Sacrifice of Angels, where I talked about how which are the two follow-up episodes to this one, and how they show Odo's turn back to align herself with Kira, and how I love that. I think that was progressed so well. Like, I don't think it's in contrast to this episode, because in the very next episode, Fate of the Ball, you see Odo having doubts. But I think that makes some people like, well, it doesn't make sense. At the end of this episode, he's like, oh, fuck you all, I don't care. And then all of a sudden he said, but that makes sense. It's buyer's remorse. That at first he was just so enticed. So you have that intoxication that just, having, I'm trying to think of the word slipping my mind. But being infatuated, that's the word I'm looking for. Being infatuated with something, and you get this really high, and you're just totally in 100% in, and that's all you can think about. But then that slowly starts to wear off, and then you start thinking about what you've really done. Wait a second, I've actually betrayed, like, the woman I love, and I betrayed everything I knew, and that slowly starts to hit Odo over the course of the next few episodes, where eventually he turns back to them. And as I said, I talked about this already in the reviews I did for these two episodes, and how I thought it was perfect. I totally bought it. I thought it was so well done, and this is why serialized storytelling is better than episodic, because you couldn't get such detailed, in-depth, great story character arcs like that works in an overlying, like, plot of the Dominion War, of seeing Cisco and them struggling and living this life of war. That's why I think that side plot doesn't suck, and that's why I think it works with this episode, because it illustrates what they're fighting for. It illustrates the stakes, that the Dax is out there risking her life, and Cisco's worrying about her, and they could all die, and it all depends on the Damar Dominion taking down this minefield, and Odo was just like, fuck it. And, like, that's why I don't think the side plot is bad, and that's why I think it still works for this episode, which is amazing. It is simply one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, one of the best episodes of any of the entire Star Trek franchise. So, my rating for Behind the Lines out of 10 is, of course, a 10, the best. An absolute amazing episode. As I said, the side plot is not bad. It works for the episode, but the thrust of the episode is Dominion takeover, and like, it's just not every scene, but some of these scenes are like masterpieces. They're just so beautifully written, so beautifully acted. It's just the way that they're constructed with the character stories, the character arcs make complete and total sense, and it's very innovative, risk-taking storytelling that no Star Trek show has done before this, that has this long arc where they're living under an occupation, and it's absolutely amazing. Anyway, that is it for my review of Behind the Lines. Be sure to check out my channel. It has a review of many more Star Trek episodes. I don't think there's a poll up at the moment you can vote in, but I will have a poll up shortly for the next batch of Star Trek episodes you can vote in, so be sure to check that out. Also, check out my channel, as I do many more videos and other shows like The Expanse, Lost, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.